The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
Tonight on Politics Now, keeping a roof over Nevadans' heads. The program meant to help renters and landlords as the eviction moratorium is lifted. Plus,
I'm multi-layered. I also know how to kick off the heels, throw on some boots, and get some stuff done.
Republican Senate candidate Sherelle Mendenhall talks to us about her campaign.
I would love to see policies that bring back manufacturing to the U.S.
And congressional candidate Carolina Serrano answers questions about immigration policy and working on the Trump campaign.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now.
Keeping people off the streets and money in landlords' pockets is the goal of the legislature as the eviction moratorium is lifted. Thanks for joining us. I'm Vanessa Murphy. John is off tonight. The eviction moratorium lifts in less than an hour. Governor Sisolak and other leaders are promoting the rental assistance program created by Assembly Bill 486. It prevents tenants from being evicted if they have proof they filed a rental assistance application. The court places a hold on the case, and arrangements are made for the landlord until the application goes through. Landlords who own single-family homes can also apply for assistance through the program.
As the pandemic has changed and evolved, so has our approach to the moratorium, and we've been able to build out rental assistance programs with state and county partners, mediation programs with the court system, and most recently by partnering with the Nevada legislature to create a so-called glide path for evictions.
It's important to note, in order to qualify for this, you have to apply for rental assistance. So leaders recommended applying now. The county is processing 800 to 1,000 applications a week. There are currently 8,000 waiting to be processed. The county said it has paid out $165 million in rental and utility help to about 90,000 programs in the last year. We have more info on the program at 8newsnow.com. A congressional committee is looking into companies that evicted tenants during the moratorium, including one here in southern Nevada. South Carolina Democratic Congressman James Clyburn points to court records which reveal that some large corporate landlords have evicted many tenants during the COVID-19 pandemic. Congressman Clyburn says the Las Vegas-based group Siegel Group filed around 570 eviction orders during the moratorium. That's despite receiving millions of dollars in federal rental assistance money.
Congress has taken action to ensure that renters experiencing hardship can receive financial help to stay in their homes. Of course, the ultimate recipient of these funds are the landlords to whom rent is paid.
The federal moratorium runs out this weekend. Siegel Group will still have to provide more information on how many evictions they followed through with to the committee. If you are in danger of being evicted, there are resources. We have information again at 8newsnow.com. Well, the masks are back in Las Vegas. Everyone now has to wear a mask indoors, whether they are vaccinated or not. The state is following the CDC's latest recommendations, which applies to counties with at least 50 cases per 100,000 people. Right now, Clark County's rate is about 4.5 times that. We're one of 12 counties in the state where the new mask mandate applies. Clark County is considering paying people $100 each to get vaccinated. That will not include people who have already gotten the vaccine. Commissioner Tick Sagerblum says the county could budget $10 million from the hundreds of millions it received in federal coronavirus relief. That would cover $100 for 100,000 people in Clark County getting the vaccine. Commissioner Sagerblum says more and more private companies are requiring vaccines or proof of a negative test.
The reality is the employers are going to start saying, we want you to either be vaccinated or get tested on your own dime every week or twice a week. So, I mean, there are going to be some financial penalties involved, whereas if we give you this $100, then you make money as opposed to have to pay money.
The commission will talk about this at Tuesday's meeting. Nevada Senator Catherine Cortez Masto has gathered a big war chest for next year's Senate race. The Democrat has raised about $11 million so far this year. 2 Republicans have filed to run against her: Reno Wounded Warrior veteran Sam Brown and Sherelle Mendenhall. She's a former Miss Nevada 2020 and Miss California and runs a talent agency. I talked with Mendenhall to ask about the Senate race and where she stands on issues. What's your stance on immigration, and do you support building a wall?
I believe that there is a great process for people to come into this country, and that needs to be adhered to. I do believe we need to build a wall. We're at, the last number I saw was over 700% as far as, refugees coming to the border. We have drugs coming over, we have crime, and as a people group, we're trying to take care of our own right now, the people who have come in here illegally, and it's not enough. We're like you just mentioned earlier, about stimulus and giving money, the implications of people going out on the streets. So I believe we need to protect our border, have a process, adhere to that, and then we can start being stronger as a country, and then we can help and give aid to people that are in trouble.
What's your stance on DACA?
DACA, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with DACA.
What's the most important issue for you?
Our freedom. I would say that our freedom is the biggest thing, and when I, was grappling about running for U.S. Senate, I was like, what am I going to do differently than anyone else? And I see just so many things flying on social media, and I want to build yet another metaphoric wall around our rights and our privileges. For instance, I believe the government is to protect and to serve, just like our police. Before, phones were only in our in our homes; they weren't in cars. And so later, when they were causing accidents, that's when they needed to step in and put a law in place to protect us from, not driving recklessly. I think it's, the same thing now. We need to build metaphoric walls around things we didn't know we needed to protect. For instance, I love the role of a mom, a she, a woman. I don't want those rights taken away in our school system, education, in government. I don't mind anybody coming up with whatever you'd like to be called in addition. But I want to make sure my rights to be called a she, a her, a woman are protected. The right to assemble, churches, coming together. I love going to church, and I think that people need hope in a time like this.
How do you feel about the current Miss Nevada winner being transgender?
So for me, something that's really important is that we adhere by rules. So throughout all of history, the pageant has had in their rules that you need to be a natural-born woman. So I don't know that that was changed beforehand, so I really think that that should be something that's looked at. Because that means that the person who did win, obviously they thought that person was the right person, but we need to go back to the rules that were set specifically to run in this pageant, that you be a natural-born woman.
Anything else you feel like people should know about you personally?
Personally, I think that something that's important is to not judge a book by its cover. Up until this point, so many people are kind of just berating and kind of seeing from the outside instead of taking the time to get to know me. I'm multi-layered. I also know how to kick off the heels, throw on some boots, and get some stuff done. So whether it's building, I'm going to be in there demolishing, or putting, walls up. I'll do whatever it takes. So I think that's the biggest thing to understand me.
For people who will watch this interview, they may be surprised that you weren't familiar with DACA. It's something that affects many people here. What do you want to address about that? Do you think you maybe have more work to do to be taken seriously and jump into the race?
So I look at it as this. When I went to this, I knew that I wasn't going to know everything about every single question that I'm asked, and I see it as I have people around me for the right reason. I'm going to appoint them, they're going to advise me, and when it comes time for me to make a decision on that, I am going to personally do that deep dive to make sure I'm making the right decision for the people. Taking me seriously, I believe that my past shows that I'm a get-it-done kind of person. So when that scenario arises, I will address it and do the right thing for the people.
We have that full interview with her on 8newsnow.com. Look for the politics tab. We asked her about her support for President Trump and her stance on federal lands, and we'll keep putting interviews up there as we get her opponents as well. The Nevada Press Association and the state ACLU are suing to ensure reporters can cover an upcoming execution. Convicted murderer Zane Floyd is scheduled to be put to death later this year with a never-before-used drug cocktail. I talked with ACLU of Nevada attorney Chris Peterson about the lawsuit.
So tell me what the goal of the lawsuit is.
Well, the goal is transparency. We have a historic execution that the state is trying to move forward with. It's historic in the sense that the state of Nevada hasn't executed anyone in the last 15 years. It's historic in the sense that the last legislative session saw a bill get through the House that was trying to abolish the death penalty. And it's also historic in that they're experimenting with a new drug cocktail. And throughout the history of this country and other jurisdictions, when there have been experimentation with the drug cocktail, there's been some pretty disturbing results. So we're representing the press and the press's access to the execution itself, because the press acts as a proxy for the public. They observe what's going on and they report out what's happened during the execution. And in executions where there's a decent chance that something will go wrong, and in executions in the past where something has gone wrong, the media and the press have played a really important role to let the public know, hey, this didn't go as planned.
I think it's interesting because in Nevada, we often hear leaders, when questioned about transparency, say that they are all for transparency. But when it comes down to it, for reporters on the ground, we are often denied basic information. Do you think this is just another example?
So I don't necessarily want to talk about other things outside the context of what we're working with here, but I do think that when you look at government, and this is something going to what's going on right here, is that it's understandable that any government agency is going to be worried about how they'll look when they're doing something so sensitive, like executing somebody. When you're killing someone in the name of the public, you don't want there to get out that you didn't do this properly or didn't look right. But the reality, though, is that the government doesn't have a right to simply hide away where it fails, right? And it can't just block the public from seeing what's happening. And it's particularly important in situations where the state is using its power in the most pure and serious way possible in killing one of our citizens. So it's understandable why the government would not want to be transparent and why they would pay lip service to that, but in fact not want to be transparent. But the reality is the Constitution requires them to be transparent.
We'll stay on top of this case and bring you any updates. I've also put in a request to cover the execution. Running on immigration.
Everybody knows that if you have an open border, then you really aren't protecting the citizens of this country.
Up next, we talk with Republican Congressional District 4 candidate and Trump supporter Carolina Serrano. Plus, rebuilding the country. Is it possible Congress finally has an infrastructure deal? We'll tell you what's in the works.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
Incumbent Congressman Stephen Horsford has drawn a few Republicans planning to run against him. One is Carolina Serrano, who's a Colombian American born in the U.S. She worked on the Trump campaign in Nevada, and she's a UNLV graduate. Turns out she was also once an intern here at Channel 8. John Langler talked with her about her campaign.
You've been supported, notably, you've gotten some donations already from Steve Wynn. Mm-hmm. How did that happen? And obviously, given Mr. Wynn's recent history, did you have any hesitation about taking his donations?
I didn't, because I worked for Wynn and Encore for almost 8 years. And I would say in my 13 years in the service industry, those 8 years were the best ones. And so having his support means a lot. I have a lot of respect for what his vision and how he's changed Las Vegas, so I'm happy to have it.
You've just discussed about your connection with folks who work in the service industry in Las Vegas. We've been through such a difficult time with the pandemic, and the resorts were shut down for such a long time. What do they need, in your opinion? What do they need to get back on their feet, to find employment, or if they're already employed, how to get back on even terms?
I think that they need other options besides the service industry. Like I said, I mean, it's great for a bit of time, but it doesn't have that longevity that you need in order for you to be able to build a home, have a family, have, create wealth, I would say. So I think that there's just other options outside the service industry would be good for them.
So from a policy standpoint, then what does that look like in terms of getting them out of the cycle of the service industry?
So I would say, you know, hospitality is great if you want to stay in it, but I would say I would love to see policies that bring back manufacturing to the U.S., right? Because we don't really produce much here in the U.S. And I think, you know, one of the industries that I would love to see come down here would be the fashion industry. I think it would be such a great place to have that industry here in Vegas, where Vegas is kind of this fancy, glitzy place, you know?
Your announcement, you spoke a lot about immigration and finishing the wall. Why is that such an important issue? Why do you think the wall needs to be, in your words, finished?
Well, I think it's always been an important issue. I mean, I voted Democrat, and before they were always about protecting the border and protecting the country. I think everybody knows that if you have an open border, then you really aren't protecting the citizens of this country, right? It just becomes chaotic. So the border wall is important, and then there also needs to be a total immigration overhaul, because also the people who are coming here to have a better life for themselves, they're not benefiting from an open border either, because each time a new crop comes in, that's lower wages for big business and not beneficial to the people who are trying to make it.
When you say open border, the border isn't necessarily open, obviously. Is open a fair way to describe our borders right now?
Yeah, because, I mean, if you go down to, like, Texas, I love road tripping, so I've been down to Texas, Arizona. It's vast lands, and you see people crossing through where there isn't a border, there's no barrier, right? And so, yeah, I mean, DHS, we know, is overwhelmed, and so I would say that they're releasing a lot of people into the country, and they have no date to show up. Most people don't show up to the dates, so it's a problem.
You helped support former President Trump in his re-election campaign. How much of that experience would you bring into a primary and a general election campaign? How much do you lean on the former president? Do you still support him? Do you think he should still be president?
Well, obviously I worked on his campaign. It was a great experience, so yes, I support the president. I think that experience was one of the best experiences, and I would say that everyone should knock doors in their community, because you find out that you have a lot more in common with your neighbor than you think. And so I think there's a lot more in common between people who are Trump supporters and people who are Bernie supporters, and you could bring them together on certain issues.
We have that full interview up at 8newsnow.com. So far, she's raised about $50,000 for her campaign. Her other Republican opponent so far is Sam Peters. Putting out the flames.
We need more bodies, and we need more air support.
Up next, the changes Steve Sisolak and other Western governors want to see made to how we tackle wildfires in the West. Plus, do we finally have a deal? Our Washington, D.C. Bureau breaks down what's in a deal on our country's important infrastructure. The governors of Nevada and California are asking the federal government for more help and money to fight wildfires. They made the comments while touring the damage from the Tamarack fire in Gardnerville, Nevada. That fire started on federal land in California, then spread to Nevada. It has forced 16,000 people out of their homes. Both governors say they are having a conversation with President Biden later this week. This may sound like deja vu, but Congress is one step closer to closing a deal on the president's massive $1.2 trillion infrastructure plan. A procedural vote passed with 67 yeses in the normally split Senate. As it stands, the bill contains $550 billion in new spending for public works projects. Members of both parties say they believe a final deal will happen.
At a time when Washington seems broken, this group of members behind me came together.
Each of us are deeply committed to demonstrating to the country and to the world that our government can work, and it can work for the people of the United States of America.
John Langler talked with our Washington, D.C. Bureau correspondent Alexandra Limon about the next steps for the bill and what to expect.
Before this, it had only been a small group of bipartisan senators that had been working on the deal behind the scenes. So this makes the process more official and more likely to head on the road to actually being passed, but it doesn't guarantee that. The full Senate still has to come to an agreement on this $1 trillion proposal, and then the measure would need to get 60 votes in order to pass in the U.S. Senate.
Well, Alex, the President Biden, top Democrats, they had much more ambitious plans, $3.5 trillion package they talked about with human infrastructure. Where do things stand on that aspect of the discussion?
Right, that was a really sweeping proposal that the president and top Democrats want to pass that includes investments in things like clean and green energy across the country, and also in those human infrastructure measures that you mentioned, like free pre-K education and community college for all students. The Democrats were hoping to pass that separately with a process called budget reconciliation that would only require 50 votes in order for that to pass in the Senate rather than 60. Well, it looks like that is in jeopardy now, too, because Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona said she does not support the idea of spending $3.5 trillion. I mean, that is just a massive number. So she says she is not on board, and Democrats need every single Democrat on board. So they are now forced to work with her to either try to scale back or rework the package into something that she might support if they want any hope of passing that at all.
We'll see where things go on Capitol Hill. Alex Limon, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
You're watching Politics Now.
So earlier this week, I did a story about a man who's now living in Las Vegas but working in Southern California. It's about a 4-hour drive he's been doing for more than a year. The DMV told us that in the first 6 months of 2021, more than 22,000 Californians turned in their licenses and IDs in Nevada. You can check out that story at our website, 8newsnow.com. It's gotten a lot of comments from people not too happy about the Californians moving to Nevada. Tell us what you think. Thanks so much for joining us at Politics Now.